Oh, hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our special evening edition of our weekly training video. As many of you probably noticed, Facebook was out of commission for a lot of today, but I wanted to squeeze this in today since I promised this would be coming out on Monday. Today we are talking about cars, car rides for dogs, dogs who hate riding in the car. This will be a two-part series. Today I'll be talking about things you can try to adjust before you ever get into the car that don't include training per se, but might help your dog have a more pleasant experience in the car. And I'll show you an example with our little guy, Pancake. All right, jumping right into the slides. Oh, and as always, if you have questions, put them underneath the video where you're watching and they'll pop up for me. If you're listening to this and you have a dog who hates the car, I'd love to hear about it. Post a comment, let me know kind of what's going on with them. All right, so this is before you hit the road. There are lots of things you can do once you're on the road, or some things anyway, but this is all stuff you can do beforehand. All right, this series is for folks who have dogs who either refuse to get into the car, or once they're in the car, or when you're driving, they howl, they bark, they cry. Maybe they get sick, they pant heavily, drool, shake. Essentially, dogs who are miserable in the car. So this is the big picture, things we'll be covering in this two-part series. What can you change right away? And that's what we'll talk about today. And then next week, we'll talk about training to load up to get into the car, and then training for the actual drive for when the car is moving. All right, so what immediate changes can we make that don't involve a long training process? I'm always in favor of starting with these quicker interventions first, if you can, to see if something will help. One thing we'll talk about is activity before a drive. So is there anything your dog can do before they get in the car that will make their experience a little better, will help, make their behavior a little more desirable once they are in the car? Medication can be a huge help. I'll talk a little more about that. And the way you have the car set up, where your dog rides and with what kind of containment, etc., also can make a huge difference to some dogs. All right, so just touching briefly on pre-ride activity, it's worth giving it a shot if you haven't before. Some dogs, if they get a nice walk or run in, maybe some training, some mental stimulation, scent work before you get in the car, that might help improve their behavior in the car. Maybe a bit tired, so worth giving it a try. Medication, a couple different kinds of medication that are often used for dogs who hate the car: anti-anxiety meds and anti-nausea. And this is something, obviously, I can't recommend or tell you what to do, but if you have a dog who really struggles in the car, it's worth talking to your vet about whether some kind of medication might help, might be appropriate. All right, and car setup. This one has a lot of aspects to consider where your dog is in the car. So front or back, front seat, back seat, or the way back if you've got, an SUV or something that has that space in the far back for a dog. Is your dog confined in a crate, maybe tethered by a seatbelt, totally loose? There are several options there. Do you have visual barriers up? So for instance, you can have a crate that has a blanket or towel over it so the dog can't see out. Some dogs do better. Their behavior is more desirable, I guess, to the humans anyway, when they can't see out the window. And some dogs struggle more when they can't see out the window. So something that, you have to kind of experiment with any individual dog. Some dogs, if you have a really high value food toy or chews, some other activity for them to do rather than, say, barking or something, that can make a big difference and improve their behavior in the car. All right, so we just talked about the pre-ride activity, medication, and the car setup. And I'll walk you through this example with Pancake. We have been very actively working on car training recently because I need to drive him right now to take him for a walk because of the national forest closures in our area. And he does not like the car. So let me tell you a little bit about what's going on with him. Where we started. So where did Pancake start out in this training journey? Well, the first few rides I took with Pancake, and most of the rides I've taken with Pancake, have been 2 to 3 hours long because it was necessary travel between where we normally live up in the mountains and down to my mother-in-law's house. So we had nonstop barking and howling, which is stressful for everybody, shaking or trembling, heavy panting. So a lot when dogs are stressed, this is a sign that not everybody picks up if you're a little newer to dog body language, but when a dog is panting really heavily and you don't think maybe it's hot enough to warrant that kind of heavy panting, anxiety or pain can be involved. And he would stand up a lot in the car. And because he's a little guy with 3 legs and one of the missing legs is a front leg, he's pretty unstable in the car when he's standing up. And so he would fall over, fall over a lot, stumble a lot, which I don't think improved his opinion of the car ride. So let me show you a short video of his behavior prior to trying some of these interventions. So here, I don't know, you can see he's shaking, and the car here is stationary. We're just parked in the driveway. We haven't gone anywhere, and he's quite nervous. There's some crying. I guess I should have given a warning for anyone who has a dog in the room. This might excite them. So this would basically go on the entire time. I was in a great mood that day. All right, so that's what it kind of looked like. Pancake would shake, would cry, would howl, would bark, just would not settle really the entire time. Very unpleasant for all involved. So before we talk about what we did, it's always good to back up and think, well, what do I want at the end of whatever training or manipulations, interventions, environmental changes I'm going to make? What do I want to see at the end? And so my goal for Pancake is for him to be sitting or lying down for most of the drive. I mean, I don't care if he, gets up sometimes or moves around, but I'd like him not to be constantly falling over because I don't think he enjoys it. And he's much more stable if he's seated or lying down. I would like him, no vocalizations isn't really a behavior, but whatever he's doing, I would like him to be doing it quietly without barking the entire time. I'd like to see some normal breathing, not that frantic, fast-paced breathing that I interpret as meaning he's pretty anxious. Even better if he would sleep sometimes for these long car rides. I would love to see some sleeping. All right, so let's talk about what we tried. I tried a lot of different stuff and I kept track of all of it. And if you try to do this with your dog, I recommend taking pretty detailed notes for each drive. What did you try? What kind of setup did you have? Any meds, any pre-ride activity? And then what was your dog's behavior like in the car? We tried extra exercise, like extra long hikes right before we got into the car. We tried anti-nausea medication. We tried several different iterations and combinations of anti-anxiety medication. We tried many different car setup variations, and I'll show you some of those. So did this help us? What helped? Did anything help? Exercise, there's no clear trend in the data I've collected with Pancake that it makes all that much difference whether or not he does get a walk or a hike right before we get in the car. He's anxious regardless. We saw also no change in behavior with anti-nausea medication. Same everything, shaking, barking, heavy panting, etc. We have seen pretty significant benefit from the anti-anxiety medication, and I'll show you some examples of that in a second. So let's take a look at some video. All right, so here's one of the first positive signs I saw of increasing some of his anti-anxiety medication during a car ride. Here we're parked, so the car is not moving, which is, you know, the easiest version of being in the car. But you can see he's engaging with a food toy. And that was a pretty good sign for me, because previously I always provided lots of food toys in his crate or wherever he was riding, and he wouldn't touch them. So this is the car parked and he's into his Kong. Here he's taking treats from my hand. I think we're parked here, and then in a second we're going to be doing some slow movement here. Moving, and he is, sorry, this video is kind of oddly framed, but he's going to be rooting around looking for treats, even though the car is moving, which is a pretty big deal. You see, you don't have that heavy panting like this. May not be 100% happy, but he definitely looks better. And then we also got more lying down. So you see him lying down here. Here he's still anxious for sure. We're getting some vocalizations, but he did do some lying down, which previously he really didn't do much of before we tried increasing the medication some. Okay. So exercise, no clear benefit. Nausea meds, no change. Anti-anxiety meds, beneficial. Although clearly not enough, right? He's still anxious. I was getting some more of what I wanted to see, at least lying down, sometimes eating, at least, but he was still pretty anxious. And although I knew we would need to do training, I was still also continuing to try to find any changes I could make to the setup that might make this easier for him and make it easier for me too. So the car setup mattered a lot, possibly the most of all of these, all of these things, although we couldn't do it without the anti-anxiety medication. So for car setup, I experimented with having him in the front seat versus the back seat. And it seemed like maybe the front seat was a little bit better. He was a bit quieter, seated more often, but it seemed to mostly be restricted to the times where I could actually be touching him or feeding him directly, which isn't a great or isn't super viable if I'm going to be doing a long highway drive or something. Because he was in the front seat, I could reach my hand over and put my fingers in his crate, and he would rest his cheek against them, and he would be quieter. But it still wasn't, it wasn't very feasible for a drive, let's just say. So only if I was feeding by hand or petting was the front seat better. So really, it was probably more about the petting and the hand feeding than the front versus back seat. Visual barrier, we tried both with and without the crate covered. And he did not like having his view occluded, especially, and it wasn't so much out the window. He didn't care to look out the window, but if the crate was covered on the side where I was, he would like frantically pull in at the blanket or the towel, try to pull it into his crate. So he was quieter if he could see me. A really big difference for him was whether or not to use a crate. There's a lot to be said for having a dog who rides nicely in a crate. They're not going to wander around the car. They're clearly contained. And Pancake is quite happy in his crate in other contexts, but in the car, no. So he did really very much better once I tried some options that didn't involve the crate. All right, so I don't have good video, but I have some photos to show you, I think. Meds and no crate. So this was the best combination. We started to see more lying down instead of standing up, kind of pacing around and falling over a lot. We had no barking. So this was huge. When we added, we took away the crate on top of the higher dose of anti-anxiety meds we were trying for the car, we got rid of the barking. And I have to say, for my sanity, this was a pretty big deal. Listening to that barking for 2 to 3 hours was tough. And of course, it was really hard on Pancake. We actually saw him sleep a little bit, just a little, just like a few minutes, but still, I was amazed. But we still did have some indications he was still anxious, of course. We hadn't totally fixed the problem. There was still some heavy panting, that kind of wide mouth stress panting. And he wanted to climb into the front with me. I have a hammock in the back seat that kind of kept him from actually making it over into the front, but he was like up behind my chair, whapping my shoulder with his one front paw, which was sometimes a little distracting. And he seemed a little bit stressed out. I mean, I'm completely projecting, but he seemed a little stressed out. He couldn't get to me. He was kind of whining and heavy panting and pawing at my shoulder. So way, way better than previously. Still some work to do there. So here are some photos of Pancake with his combination of a good increased dose. We worked with his vet quite extensively on this, of anti-anxiety medication and not having a crate. He is tethered, I think in this one. He has a pretty long tether, but it keeps him from getting into the front. And here he got his front leg over, but you can see he's looking a little doopy, kind of drugged a bit, but not too stressed out, which is what I'm going for. Here he is in his like 2 minutes of sleep that I was so startled I pulled over and took a picture. When I noticed that he was sleeping under Juno. Juno is quite tolerant, even if she doesn't always love it. All right, so we talked about these things: activity before drive, medication, and car setup. Our goals were sitting or lying down most of the drive, no vocalizations, normal breathing, and some sleeping. What do we have so far from our interventions that we've tried? We've done a lot of experimenting with the car setup. We did a lot of experimenting with doses and types of medication. We still aren't getting sitting or lying down for most of the drive after just these interventions I just talked about. He's still standing up and moving around quite a bit. We did get no vocalizations, which was a big win. We still didn't get, I mean, there was some normal pace breathing, but there's still a fair amount of heavy panting. And we did get a little bit of sleep, not a ton, but at least we got a little to start out. All right, so I've talked about some things you could try if you'd like. You know, talk with your trainer and or your veterinarian, depending on what you're going to try, because they know your dog and they'll know, you know, what's appropriate for them to experiment with. But I've told you what we tried with Pancake and what worked and what didn't seem to help too much. That doesn't mean that those same things will be helpful or not with your own dog, though. It's really something that you have to look at on a case-by-case basis. Next week, we'll talk about training your dog to get into the car on their own, and then training for the drive. So training for when your dog is, when you're actually moving. For a lot of dogs, that's when the panting or barking, whatever, really starts up, is when the car's moving. So we'll go over that as well. All right, everybody, I hope this was helpful. Dogs who hate the car, it's a tough problem. It's stressful for everybody. It's especially stressful if you have a dog who both hates the car and has separation anxiety. So it's like you can't leave with them, you can't take them with you, and you also can't leave without them. So this is something that I very much sympathize with, as that's what we're dealing with. If you're not already in our free Facebook support group, facebook.com/groups/dogkind support. Very nice group of people, all struggling with similar issues to what you likely are with your dog. We also have our monthly training membership, which we'd love to see you in. If you're working on these kind of issues and want a little more one-on-one guidance, that's a good way to do it, to have trainers there to answer your questions. All right, folks, any questions about arranging the car, exercise, medications for car training, for getting your dog ready to ride in the car quietly, in theory, happily? All right. So if you have a question on this and you're watching it as a recording, I'll still see it. Oh, here's a question, just a second. Oh, I think I can make this go on the screen. So fancy. Did the anti-anxiety medications have side effects that affected them after the car ride as far as mobility, cognition, etc.? Yes, for him, what we used was meds that have like an 8-hour effective period. So most of our drives are long, and considering how miserable he is on car rides, I'm fine if he's drugged for the whole day, especially for those 2 to 3 hour rides that aren't that frequent, but I have to do occasionally. I'll show you some next week for our training, like our regular training for the car. I don't give him extra medication because our training is short and I don't want to drug him for the whole day. But I do, so yeah, he is a bit sedated those days, sleeps more, but to me, it's better than him suffering for those 2 to 3 hours in the car. I'm gonna make this go away. But yeah, you could, if you work with a veterinary behaviorist, they might be able to help you figure out if using medication. I think a lot of people do need to use medication during the training process as well. He's on meds every day anyway, but we just keep him on his regular level of daily meds for his short training sessions. And that just means we have to dial back. We can't drive for 2 hours. It would be way too much. But let's see. How do I know if I should crate the dog or would that make things worse? Well, maybe someone else knows how to tell without trying it, but I don't. I mean, I guess if you know your dog hates a crate in the house, probably not going to help in the car. But if you have a dog who's pretty happy in a crate at home, then you could always try it out. I would just test it for something pretty short though, like around the block or, a very short drive. That's what I did. I first tried the crate also because I have 2 other dogs in the car and I didn't want to have to constantly worry about what was going on back there with the much smaller dog. So I tried crating it first. And I didn't realize until I stopped using the crate how much worse the crate was making it. But yeah, I wouldn't have known without trying it personally. So yeah, give it a try. If your dog's not at all crate trained, it might be worth spending some time. I think it probably would be worth spending some time doing crate training in the house, getting them real happy in the crate before you try it in the car. Yeah, so like I said, next week, training, you'll see Pancake going from what we saw today, shaking and shrieking and basically hating the car. What steps do we take in actual training to not just change his setup and give him drugs so he felt better, which is good. It's good. I'm glad we're doing that. But what have we done to help him behave in a way that at least that I interpret as being less anxious, and also like I said, sitting or lying down, doing things that at least keep him a little more physically stable in the car instead of constantly just toppling over. He sometimes topples over without a car being in a moving car, so doesn't take much of a bump in the car for him to fall over. So we worked on some down and sit for him in the car. But real small steps, the dog tells you, and the dog tells you when it's too much, and it's almost always, they can almost always take less than we think they should be able to. So it's good to set your standards low, set the bar really low when you're going into any kind of training with fear. Car training is no exception. And I know it's hard for us because, a lot of dogs have no trouble in the car and we just need to go places. Because we can't always just suspend car rides completely. Of course, that would be great if you could say, hey, I don't have to drive my dog anywhere for the next month or 2, and I'm just going to carefully do this training. That would probably be ideal. I personally didn't have that luxury. So during the times where I knew I had to drive, really necessary, like we had to evacuate due to wildfires, I was just like, well, we're going to try what we can do in the moment to make it better. And then when I have more time, we're going to work on training. So that's what we did. So if you are in that situation where you have to drive your dog, there's no way around it. I think it's very important to look at some of these interventions you can do, particularly talking with your vet about whether medication might help. Because if you try to train while you're also doing these drives that are really unpleasant for your dog, and your dog is doing all these behaviors that you don't want them to do, like barking and crying and, or, you know, whatever, it'll make your training pretty tough. It'll be tough to make progress because your dog is having these miserable experiences regularly in the car. So then to go into your training session and be like, I'm teaching you the car is great. The dog's like, yeah, I know you're lying. All right, guys. Thank you for being here, and thanks for everyone's patience. I'm glad that Facebook and all our social media channels made it back up today, so this could get out at least on the right day. And I will see you all next week with more sort of fear of car, anxiety in the car information. If you have any questions in the meantime, post in the Facebook group, email us at admin@dogkindtraining.com. Or you can always join the training membership, which is a pretty affordable way to have trainer access kind of 24/7. And that link, I believe, is on the post for this video, so you can check that out too. All right, everyone, have a wonderful Monday evening. You've made it through Monday. Congratulations. I'll see you next week.